I'll try unmuting myself. That'll probably work better. Once again, good morning. Let's go ahead and get ourselves started for today. And just a reminder, it is Wednesday, the 29th day of April 2020. My name is Paul Savoy, and this is the weekly class Zoom meeting for Political Science 1, class number 30013. And today we're going to be doing several things. In just a moment, I will go ahead and give you a couple of announcements and reminders having to do with the class. Then I will go ahead and spend as much time as you want going over test number 2, the assignment that you are currently working on that is due this evening at 11:59 p.m. Submitted via Canvas, not counting, of course, that 3-day or 72-hour grace period. So I will spend some time going over the logistics for the test, the process for the test, and then if you have any content questions regarding the test, obviously I won't give you the answers specifically, but if there is a concept that is covered on the test that you were unclear about, I will go ahead and provide you with some clarification on that. And like I said, we'll take as much or as little time with that as you want. And then with any time that we have left over this morning, I will go ahead and introduce, kind of give you an overview, first of all, of the broader topic, sort of the broader unit of information that you're going to be working on in this class over the next 3 weeks or so. And that's specifically talking a little bit about the 3 national government branches: Congress, the folks who make the laws, the president, who is supposed to enforce the laws, and the courts, the judicial branch, which is supposed to interpret the laws. So I'll kind of give you a couple of things to think about to kind of help frame your learning about the 3 national government branches. And then I'll give you an overview of the notes that you'll be looking at for next Wednesday's assignment. That is the discussion forum post on the U.S. Congress. So I'll briefly go over some of the highlights for the Congress notes that are now available for you on the modules page on our Canvas course page. So that's pretty much the agenda for today. So first of all, again, just a couple of reminders regarding if you need to get a hold of me, communicate with me about anything having to do with a particular assignment for this class, anything having to do with the class in general, or really about anything that you think I might be able to help you with. Obviously, at any time, you can send me an email or a Canvas message. But remember, I do also offer twice a week, Monday and Wednesday afternoons between 2:30 and 3:30 Pacific Daylight Time. I do offer those virtual student hours where you can go ahead and meet with me one-on-one on Zoom and deal with any question or concern that you might have, anything that you want to talk to me about. Now, remember, during those weekly virtual Zoom student hours, I'm not lecturing, I'm not presenting material in the way that I do during our weekly class Zoom meetings, like the one we're having now. Basically, the purpose of the virtual student hours is just like when we were back face-to-face on campus. I had my student hours every week, and you would visit my office and talk to me about whatever you need to talk to me about. That's the basic purpose of these virtual student hours. So remember, since test number 2 is due this evening, not counting the grace period, if you have any specific questions regarding test number 2, one more opportunity for you to get those questions answered would be to visit me during those virtual student hours. So if you want to access me during those virtual student hours, you can find the Zoom link and the password for that recurring meeting on our homepage for our Canvas class. If you scroll down right past the pictures to where it's the picture where it says basic course information, you'll see the Zoom link and password for the virtual student hours. And please feel free to stop by and see me. And remember that if you do, you will initially be put into a virtual waiting room. And as soon as I am able to work with you one-on-one, I will bring you out of that virtual waiting room and we can talk live on Zoom and accomplish whatever it is that we need to accomplish. So there you go. So any questions about these virtual student hours? Again, Monday and Wednesday afternoons, 2:30 to 3:30 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time on Zoom. Any questions, comments, or problems with those? And again, anytime you have a question or comment this morning, please feel free to unmute your mic, or if you'd rather not, feel free to put your question or your comment in the group chat and I can respond from there. So anything at all before we go ahead and move on. Okay, so again, the main thing that I wanted to deal with during our get together this morning has to do with test number 2. Obviously, test number 2 is the assignment that you are currently working on now. And just before I came on to Zoom for this meeting, I noticed that at this point, 9 of you have gone ahead and submitted your test number 2 to me via Canvas. So I appreciate that, which means that most of you still have not. And remember, the formal actual due date for the test is tonight at 11:59 p.m., 1 minute before midnight. But you do automatically have that 3-day or 72-hour grace period that you can rely on as well. So in other words, you have 3 days past the due date to be able to submit your test to me via Zoom, and I will accept the test and I will not deduct any points for lateness. So there you go. Now, if for some reason you have a lot going on in your life right now, and I completely understand that, and if you realize now that not only are you not going to be able to make the deadline of tonight at 11:59 p.m., but you're also probably also not going to be able to make the deadline 3 days later with the grace period, please let me know. Please send me an email, send me a Canvas message, let me know a little bit about your situation. And I'm sure that we can work out a solution so that you can get your test turned in when you reasonably can and still get credit for doing so. So if you're having a problem with due dates for the test, please do let me know ASAP and we will work through it. I'm obviously trying to be as flexible as I can as we all work through this unprecedented situation that we are all dealing with right now regarding COVID-19 and all the other things that come up as a result of that. So first of all, just in case you weren't with me during last week's Zoom meeting, let me just remind you about the format for test number 2. It, for the most part, is very similar to the format that we had for test number 1 that we took back in class when this class was still meeting face to face. If you haven't yet accessed test number 2 yet, it's easy to find. All you have to do is click on the assignment link in the left-hand menu of our Canvas homepage, and then scroll down to where it says test number 2. And click on that link and it takes you right there. And what you will find is that test number 2 has the same 2-part format as test number 1. Test number 2, part 1, you have 22 terms listed there for you to choose from in that short answer section. And these 22 terms are all things that we have learned about since test number 1, because remember, the tests in this class are not cumulative. So in part 1 on test number 2, I have terms related from what we've learned from public opinion, mass media, political parties and interest groups, campaigns, and elections. So everything that we've learned about since test number 1, there are terms there for you in part 1 of the test. Now, from those 22 terms that I list there in part 1, you can choose and answer any 8 of those terms that you want. And for each of the 8 terms that you choose to answer in part 1 of the test, in about 3 to 4 complete sentences each, you are doing 2 things. First thing that you are doing is that you are providing me with a basic definition of the term. And also, You are telling me the significance of the term. Why is the term important to us? Why did we bother to learn about it in the first place? Sort of how does it connect to other things that we are talking about that might be related to it in the class? So in about 3 to 4 sentences each, definition and significance. Each of those 8 short answer responses will be worth a maximum of 7.5 points each, for a maximum of 60 points possible for part 1 in test number 2. So any questions about part 1 and test number 2? Okay. And then part 2 of the test is the mini essay section, just like what you were used to with test number 1 that we took back on campus a number of weeks back. And I have there for you 4 potential mini essay questions that you can answer. So read through those 4 questions, choose the one question of the 4 that you feel you can do the best job of answering, and then give me a response to that question in approximately 5 paragraphs. Remember, each of those 4 mini essay questions has multiple parts. And so make sure that in your response, you are answering all of the different parts of the question. And as for the length, 5 paragraphs is probably going to be about what you need to answer the question thoroughly. Now, some of you may be able to answer all the elements of the question in slightly less than 5 paragraphs. If that's you, that's fine. Some of you may need slightly more than 5 paragraphs to answer the question thoroughly. If that's you, that's fine. But 5 paragraphs is kind of the suggested guideline, kind of the ballpark that you are shooting for. And that essay question in part 2 is worth the remaining 40 points possible for the test. Now, remember, a couple different things for this test from our first test. This test is completely open book and open notes. So as you are working on the test, please do feel free to check all of your sources. Look at any of the assigned readings that you've been working on over the past few weeks. Look at any of the sets of class notes that I've given you on Canvas over the past few weeks. Take a look at any of the videos that you've watched over the past few weeks. Feel free to use any and all sources of information that I've made available for you to help you respond to both part 1 and part 2 of the test. So it's completely open book and open note. The other thing to mention, remember back test number 1, we took it face-to-face in class. You were required for test number 1 to submit an outline of your part 2 mini essay question along with the rest of your test. You do not need to do that for this test. No outline necessary. All you need to do for part 2 is just give me your 5 paragraph answer to that mini essay question and you are good to go. And again, you can submit the test to me via Canvas in 2 ways. When you're looking at the assignment on Canvas, you will see a big red button at the top right-hand side of the assignment guidelines. It says submit test. You can submit the test to me in 2 ways. One way, you can open up a text box in Canvas and either type in your answers into the text box and submit it, or you can go ahead and cut and paste your answers into that text box and submit it. Or if you'd rather, you can just go ahead and upload a file via Canvas. The only files that I will accept, though, for your test are a doc file, a docx file, or a PDF file. So please do not, send me a Google Docs file or something like that. Just a docx, or PDF file, please. And please do submit your test to me via Canvas. Please do not send me an email or a Canvas message with your test linked to that. All right. So that is all the logistical and process stuff as far as test number 2 goes. Any questions, comments, problems about any of that stuff? And again, you can either open your mic and ask me a question, or you can put something in the group chat. So any questions about the logistics and process about test number 2? Anybody? Okay. So as my dog starts barking, I apologize. questions, apparently. Next thing, if you started taking a look at test number 2, do you have any questions about any of the information, any of the concepts that are covered in test number 2? So again, obviously, I won't give you the answers to the questions. You know, you won't say, well, here's what you need to say for question 2 and part 2 if you want to get a good grade. But if there is a concept that is covered in test number 2 that is not making sense to you after you've read about it, you've watched videos about it, you've done all that stuff, then now is a great time to ask. So any content or information questions about any of the concepts listed for test number 2? Anybody? Okay. So remember, if questions do come up regarding test number 2 after we end this meeting, you can always send me a Canvas message, you can send me an email, or you can drop by this afternoon during my virtual student hours between 2:30 and 3:30 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. So what I would like to do for our remaining time together this morning is to go ahead and preview a couple of things for you. First of all, I want to preview kind of the broad unit of information that we're going to be focusing on over the next 3 weeks or so in this class. So over the next few weeks, once you've got test number 2 submitted, we're taking the next logical step in this class, and we're going to be talking about the 3 major institutional structures within the U.S. national government, that being Congress, the legislative branch, the folks who make national government laws, followed by the president, who heads the executive branch, and their main job is to enforce national government laws once they're made. And then finally, there is the judicial branch, the court system, and their job is to go ahead and interpret national government laws, to tell both government officials and the public what laws actually mean in practice. So I'll talk a little bit about why we're discussing the 3 national government branches at this point in the semester in just a couple of minutes. Once I do that, then I'm going to spend the rest of my time this morning going over some of the highlights for the notes that I posted for you, I think yesterday, on the modules page on Canvas. I opened up the Congress module for you, put the notes up there, as well as the 2 required crash course videos dealing with Congress. And so I'll give you an overview of the notes, the important things to look for as you are learning about the U.S. Congress, and hopefully that will help you be prepared to write your next discussion forum post assignment, which is due not today, but next Wednesday at 11:59 p.m. And that, of course, is dealing with the U.S. Congress. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about this. Why are we spending the next few weeks in this class talking about Congress, the president, and the courts, the 3 national government branches? Well, it's the next logical step in terms of what we have been learning about in this course since the beginning of the semester. Because think about it. At the very start of the semester leading up to test number 1, we went ahead and spent a lot of time talking about the origins, development, and the evolution of our country's current political rule book, this thing that we call the U.S. Constitution. So we understood, you know, what were some of the major things on the minds of the folks who wrote the U.S. Constitution. And so we went ahead and looked at important events like, you know, what did American political leaders have to deal with when we were a series of 13 British colonies, and the events leading up to the American Revolution and the creation of the Declaration of Independence, as well as the creation of our very brief first disastrous Constitution, the Articles of Confederation. So all of that background information helped us to understand why our current Constitution says what it says and does what it does. So once we got that really solid foundation of information about the Constitution, and we took test number 1. We then went ahead and spent the weeks leading up to test number 2, including our movement completely online in this class, talking about linkage mechanisms, talking about the different ways that we attempt to have a consistent, robust two-way flow of communication back and forth between the people and the government in the United States. And if you recall, we said that this was crucial, right? That properly functioning linkage mechanisms were crucial to the long-term survival of our democratic political system. Because how can you have democracy in the United States? How can you have a system where the people have the ultimate last word over what government does if the people don't know what government's doing, and if the government doesn't know what the people want it to do? So we looked at public opinion. We looked at mass media and political parties, interest groups, and campaigns and elections. And what you may have come to understand as we've talked and learned a lot about these linkage mechanisms over the past several weeks is that, in one way or another, each of our 4 linkage mechanisms have some problems in the year 2020. They have some limitations, some things that are preventing them from really providing that consistent, robust flow of useful information back and forth between the people and the government. So now that we've talked about the Constitution, and now that we've talked about linkage mechanisms, it makes sense really logically that the next information that we learn about in this class is about the 3 major structural parts of the US national government: the folks who make the laws, the folks who enforce the laws, and the folks who interpret the laws. We can much better understand Congress, the president, and the courts now that we have the knowledge of the Constitution under our belts, and now that we also understand how linkage mechanisms work, as well as the limitations with those linkage mechanisms. So here's the thing. We're learning about Congress this next week, and then the president the week after that, and the courts the week after that. So here's the big picture. Here are a couple of things that I want you to keep in mind, a couple of things that I want you to think about as we learn about Congress, the president, and the courts. The first thing that I want you to think about is to think back to a very important concept that we talked about very early in the semester when we were talking about the creation of our current Constitution back during the Philadelphia Convention in the summer of 1787. And if you recall, I said that in creating our current Constitution, the framers had all kinds of priorities and objectives, all kinds of things that they wanted to accomplish in creating this new Constitution. But above everything else, they had 2 huge priorities in mind. And if you recall, one of those 2 huge priorities that the framers had in creating our current Constitution was to try and figure out, how do they create a national government for the United States that is both strong enough to maintain order in society, but not so strong that it threatens the people's basic freedoms, that it allows the government to take away the people's natural rights? And remember why the framers were so concerned about this, trying to create a national government strong enough but not too strong. It was because of some really bad experiences that they had in the past. On the one hand, they did not want to repeat the mistake that was made with the government of Great Britain. They did not want the US national government to be so strong, like the British government was, that it could easily abuse its authority and take away the people's basic freedoms, as the British government did to the colonists, leading to the American Revolution. So that was one thing they wanted to avoid. But at the same time, they also wanted to make sure that this new national government that they were creating under the Constitution was not so weak that it wouldn't be able to effectively carry out its job, and that is to maintain order in society. They did not want the US national government under the new Constitution to be a weak, spineless, gutless mess like it was under our first Constitution, the Articles of Confederation. So remember what we said. The framers took a couple of very basic steps in creating and organizing the government under our new Constitution in 1787 to try and bring about a national government that was both strong enough but not too strong. And one of the most important things that they put into the Constitution to try and accomplish this was the concept of separation of powers, along with its companion concept, checks and balances. And remember what we said at the time. Separation of powers is when you break the government down into its three most basic structural parts: the power to make laws, the legislative function, the power to enforce laws, the executive function, and the power to interpret laws, the judicial function. So you recognize that your government, that any government, has to do those three basic things if it's going to be successful. It has to be able to make laws, enforce laws, and interpret laws, right? So with separation of powers, what the framers did is they made sure that nobody within the structure of the national government has the ability to grab onto and use more than one of those three basic powers, those three basic functions. In other words, with separation of powers under our current Constitution, different folks make the laws. That's Congress, the legislative branch, right? Other folks enforce the laws. That's the executive branch led by the president. And finally, still other folks interpret the laws. That's the courts, the judicial branch. Now, remember why the framers thought that separation of powers was so important. They said, look, if no one within the national government has control over more than one of these three basic powers, and if the three branches are able to work together cooperatively, then chances are the national government under our new Constitution will be strong enough, but not too strong, right? And so that was the role of separation of powers. That is the significance of separation of powers under our current Constitution. Now, first of all, is that still making sense? As I've re-explained it to you, does that the memory of separation of powers kind of come back to you clearly from early in the semester? So right now, any questions or comments about anything having to do with separation of powers? Anybody? Okay, so now, one thing though about separation of powers that I didn't really emphasize when we were first learning about it towards the beginning of the semester, but that is really important for our understanding now, is the fact that the framers realized, the framers kind of assumed that if this separation of powers system was going to work in the US over the long term, if it was going to be successful in making sure the national government was strong enough but not too strong, then the framers believed that all three of the national government branches, again, Congress, the president, and the courts, would have to have roughly equal levels of power and authority. So in other words, if separation of powers is going to be successful and be sustainable over a long period of time, you can't have one branch of the three be significantly more powerful than the others. You can't allow one branch to dominate the others, because that would cause separation of powers to break down and the whole system would implode, right? So that's a really key piece that I didn't really emphasize at the time, that for this whole thing to work, Congress, the president, and the courts all have to have about the same level of power and authority. And that's a very key thing to keep in mind, because as the framers created Congress in Article 1 of the Constitution, and then created the president in Article 2, and the judicial branch, the federal court system in Article 3, the framers had this idea in mind, that they tried to design Congress, the president, and the courts so that each of those three branches would have just about the same level of power and authority, so that one could not dominate the others, so that separation of powers would continue to work. Now, here's the key, right? For a long time in our political history under the Constitution, the framers were able to maintain that roughly equal power balance amongst the three national government branches. So for a long time in our political history in the US under our current Constitution, Congress, the president, and the courts have all had about the same level of power and authority. One branch wasn't really able to dominate the others, okay? But guess what? That is no longer the case. If you look at the relationship amongst the three national government branches in the year 2020, what you will see is that there's a really big imbalance of power amongst the three national government branches. And if you ask the average American about this today, even a lot of folks who don't pay a lot of attention to government on a regular basis, an overwhelming percentage of Americans living in the US today in 2020 will tell you that they know which of the three national government branches is the most powerful, maybe even a bit too powerful, maybe even a bit too dangerous. Now, let me ask you, what do you think? And you can unmute your mics or put this in the group chat. Which of the three national government branches today do you believe is the most powerful and potentially so powerful that maybe it's a little bit dangerous? Anybody want to take a shot at this? Which of the three branches, Congress, the president, or the courts, would you say is the most powerful and the most potentially dangerous in the US right now? Anybody want to take a shot at this? Yeah, so Cheyenne just put in the group chat, the president, and Samuel did the same thing. You are absolutely right. Most Americans today will tell you, hands down, that the president is by far the most powerful and potentially the most dangerous of the three national government branches, and that actually the US Congress, the legislative branch, is perhaps the weakest and potentially least dangerous of the three national government branches. That's kind of how we see it today in general. Now, and by the way, Americans have not just been saying that the president is the most powerful and the most dangerous since over the past 3 years since Donald Trump has been president, but this has been a consensus that has been building in the United States really since the 1970s. It was starting in the 1970s and all the controversy regarding President Richard Nixon and his involvement in the Watergate scandal that eventually led to his resigning from the presidency during his second term in office. This is when political scientists, historians, folks in the media, and just ordinary Americans began to say, hey, maybe the president's got too much power. Maybe the president is able to abuse that power, to use that power in illegal ways that are bad for the country and bad for the American people. So starting in the 1970s, historians and political scientists and others began talking about this thing that we call the imperial presidency, meaning that the modern presidency is looking more and more like an emperor or a king than someone elected by the people. That gives you an idea of how the relationship, the power relationship amongst the three national government branches has changed in the United States over time. It's really out of balance. Now, the framers obviously would be very upset about this. They would be very concerned about this. They would say, hey, look, this is a potentially very big problem for the United States, because they would argue that, look, if the president is way more powerful than either Congress or the courts, and if because the president is so powerful, the president can abuse that power, use it in negative ways, then separation of powers is breaking down. And if separation of powers is breaking down, maybe the national government itself is out of control. Maybe the national government itself is too powerful. So if we could somehow dig up and reanimate the framers and have them take a look around at the US in 2020, they might be really scared by what they see in terms of this dramatic imbalance of power amongst the three branches and with the president in charge. Okay. But here's the thing. Can we make an argument that so much has changed both in the United States and in the world that today it actually makes sense, that today it is actually necessary for the president to take on a lot of excessive power, to be the most powerful of the three branches, to be pretty much dominant over Congress and the courts? Because guess what? There are some folks who make that argument that what the framers wanted made sense way back in the day, but today it doesn't make sense to have three roughly equal national government branches, that today the president truly needs to be large and in charge. So we are going to explore that argument over the next few weeks, particularly in about 2 weeks from now, when we learn more about the president, okay? But that's kind of the big picture, right? We want to understand how the power relationship amongst the three branches has changed over time, and why the power relationship amongst the three branches has changed over time. So does that make sense to us? Any questions, comments, problems about anything that I've said about separation of powers and the changing relationship, the changing power relationship amongst the three national government branches? Questions, comments, problems? Unmute your mic or put something in the group chat. Anything at all. Okay, so specifically this next week, between now and next Wednesday, you're going to be learning specifically about the US Congress, the folks who, among other things, are supposed to make national government laws. And the framers themselves, when they created our current Constitution back in 1787, they dealt with Congress first. That was the first branch that they created. They wrote about it in Article 1 of the US Constitution. So I want to spend the remaining 7 minutes or so that we have left giving you a basic overview of the notes that I posted for you on Canvas dealing with our discussion of the US Congress. And if you have these notes in front of you, either electronically or a hard copy, you will notice that they're pretty lengthy. They're pretty detailed. I have a lot to say for you regarding the US Congress. So obviously I can't go over all of the notes in detail right now, but I do want to hit on a couple of really key points that I want you to pay attention to as you were going through and talking or learning about Congress in more detail. So the first really important element about Congress that I want you to pay attention to, if you look at the very first section of your Congress notes, so Roman numeral number 1, it talks about the fact that the framers, when they first sat down to create the structure and function and process of the US Congress in Article 1 of the Constitution, they proceeded from a place of fear. Because as it says there in Roman numeral number 1 at the very top of our Congress notes, the framers strongly believed that of the three national government branches that they were creating, that Congress had the greatest potential to become overly powerful, to become abusive of that power, and to use that power kind of spin out of control and take away people's natural rights and cause all kinds of chaos and havoc in the country. So bottom line, the framers were incredibly scared of Congress. Now you're thinking, okay, well, that's fine. That's nice. Who cares? Well, think about it. The framers were afraid that Congress would become the most powerful and the most dangerous of the three national government branches. They were really scared of Congress. But is that how we perceive Congress today in the year 2020? And the answer, as I already mentioned a couple of minutes ago, is no. Most Americans today, if they're scared of any part of the national government, they're scared of the president. They're sure not scared of Congress. They see Congress as being this rather weak and ineffective joke. A lot of people see Congress as being the weakest and least dangerous of the three national government branches today. So the question that I want you to keep in mind as you are going through the Congress notes, first of all, is how did we get from there to here? How do we get from the framers in 1787 fearing Congress, assuming that Congress was going to become so powerful, so dangerous, and spin out of control and cause all kinds of chaos in the United States? How did we get from the framers' fear of a powerful, abusive Congress to where we are today, where we see Congress as being this weak, ineffective joke? And the answer to that question is actually very simple. And I talk about it in section 1 of the notes. Here's how we got from there to here. The framers were so afraid of Congress spinning out of control and abusing its power that as they sat down to create Congress in Article 1 of the Constitution, they very carefully specified in Article 1 what Congress could do and what Congress couldn't do. They created Congress in a much more specific and detailed way than they would with the presidency in Article 2 or with the courts in Article 3. In other words, as I say in the notes, the framers really sweated the details with Congress in Article 1. Why? Because they were scared of Congress. They were scared of the power abuse potential of Congress. So they did everything they could in Article 1 to box Congress in, to give Congress all the power that it needed to get its job done from day to day, but not give it any additional power that it could abuse. But guess what? The framers did a really good job of boxing Congress in. And unfortunately, the framers actually did too good of a job of boxing Congress in. They limited the power of Congress too much. And that's why today, in the year 2020, most Americans see Congress as being this weak, ineffective joke. So that's how we got from there to here. It's the framers' fault. They overreacted. Their fear of an overly powerful Congress caused them to overreact and essentially create an overly weak Congress. Does that make sense? Questions about that? Comments? Problems? Open up your mics or put something in the group chat. Are we good with this stuff? Does that make sense? Okay, so the very last thing that I want to highlight, the other big highlight in the Congress notes, is found in section 2 in Roman numeral number 2. Because guess what? When you go through the Congress notes, most of the Congress notes give you a very detailed discussion of the 6 major functions, the 6 biggest jobs that the framers gave to Congress in Article 1 of the Constitution. Now, we know the main job that Congress is supposed to be doing is making national government laws. But the framers realized that Congress needed to do a lot more than just that. they gave Congress 6 big jobs, and that's most of the notes. Okay, that's all of section 4 in the notes. And what you will notice when you go through section 4 of the Congress notes and you look at each of Congress's 6 jobs in detail, what you'll quickly realize is that the framers gave Congress way too much to do. They overloaded Congress with jobs and responsibilities and things like that, and all important things that they needed to do for the good of the country. But it was too much. And it's still too much today. See, here's the thing. There is no way that members of Congress working really hard, full out, 24/7 could adequately carry out all 6 of the jobs that the framers gave to them. It is impossible. Now, here's the key point. Since it is impossible for members of Congress to carry out all 6 of their jobs equally well all of the time, every member of Congress has to figure out their priorities based on the amount of time, energy, and effort that they have to give. Each member of Congress has to decide which of their 6 jobs will they emphasize? Will they prioritize? Which of their 6 functions will they do the best job of carrying out? And which ones will they de-emphasize? Which of their 6 jobs will they kind of push off into a corner and hope that nobody notices? Because there's no way they can do all 6 jobs equally well all the time. So every member of Congress has to figure out the priority. Which jobs do they focus on? Which jobs do they ignore? Now, it's pretty easy for members of Congress to figure this out. It's pretty simple. It's a simple calculation for members of Congress to figure out which jobs they're going to focus on and which ones they're going to push aside. And we talk about that in section 2 of the notes in Roman numeral number 2. Here's the basic thing. Virtually every member of Congress prioritizes their functions based on the re-election obsession, a concept that we talked about a number of weeks ago. And what I mean by that is most members of Congress, virtually every member of Congress, will use most all of their time, effort, and energy carrying out those jobs of Congress that help them get reelected, that help them win re-election again and again and again, so that they can keep their butts in office for as long as they can. So they emphasize those jobs that help them get reelected, but by the same token, they de-emphasize, they kind of push aside those other jobs of Congress that either don't help them get reelected or might actually harm their reelection chances. See how that works? Now, why is this important? Well, it's pretty simple. For the good of the country, members of Congress really need to figure out a way to do all 6 of their jobs all of the time. But they don't. They only focus probably on the 3 that help them get reelected. And in a way, that's good, because those 3 jobs that they focus on to help get reelected are generally good for the country. They generally provide benefits to the American people. But the problem is, those other 3 functions, those other 3 jobs that they don't pay a lot of attention to, are also important for the good of the country. And if they don't get done, the country suffers. So it's really kind of a mixed bag. So keep that in mind as you go through and look at all 6 of the jobs that members of Congress have that I talk about in section 4 of the notes. So any questions, any comments, any problems about any of the information that I highlighted in your Congress notes from Canvas? Anybody? Okay, So I sincerely apologize for going a few minutes over time. But remember, tonight at 11:59 p.m., plus the 3-day grace period, your test number 2 is due to be submitted to me via Canvas. If you are going to have a problem turning that test in via Canvas, even with the grace period, please send me an email or a Canvas message ASAP, and let's figure out a solution, okay? Also remember, next Wednesday, our discussion forum post on Congress is due, plus the 3-day grace period, of course. So once you turn test number 2 in, you definitely want to look at the assigned readings, the required videos, and of course, the notes that I've given you on Canvas dealing with Congress, because all of that will help you successfully complete that discussion forum post assignment. Remember, questions about the test or anything else having to do with the class, send me an email, send me a Canvas message, or join me during my virtual student hours this afternoon from 2:30 to 3:30 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time on Zoom. Now, thank you for joining me today. I hope you are all safe. I hope that you are all well. And please know you are not alone. We are not only going to get through this class successfully this semester, but we are going to get through life successfully during these really bizarre times that we're living in, and we'll do it together. Remember, I'm always here for you. I've got your back. So until I see you again, take care, be safe, be well, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining me.